King Recon here, and I wanted to bring up my top 5 favorite emotional Gintama OSTs because I truly feel like Gintama has some of the best emotional soundtracks. And the beautiful thing about the Gintama soundtracks is that I always relate a scene immediately to any of these. I can relate a scene to and any Gintama soundtrack in general, but mainly the emotional ones because the emotional ones play like at any time. In the middle of like the funniest Gintama episode, and it's one of the saddest soundtracks will play, and you'll be in tears, like just like that. And that's the power of the Gintama anime. So I'm going to talk about my top 5, but before I get into the top 5, I want to talk about 2 honorable mentions. The first one being Feelings to My Brother. This one is basically the one used in during Hijikata's past, or anytime that like during Kondo's past. Something I always relate this soundtrack to the Shinsengumi. Feelings to My Big Brother. It's a phenomenal soundtrack, and I love it. And it was in the Thorny arc, and I can always relate it to that. It was such a good soundtrack. And then the other one is Beauty is a Fruit During Summer. For some reason, every single time I think of the soundtrack, I always remember the Yoshiwara arc. And I always think of Seita and the whole thing he had to go through for much of his entire life, and that entire flashback of whenever Tsukuyo was looking up at what looked to be the sun, but in reality was when all of the kunais were coming directly at her. That Beauty is a Fruit During Summer is such a beautiful soundtrack, and I always think of Yoshiwara whenever I think of it. But going into the top 5 now, these were really hard because they were all right next to each other. But that's my number one. My number one is it's probably, if not my favorite, it's top 2 favorite soundtracks in all of anime, period. So let's go ahead and go to number 5. My number 5, man. Women who ask what's more important, work or me, deserve a Jumerin suplex. And you already know what scene I immediately associate with this with the Mitsuba death scene it is. It's, oh my god, dude, such an amazing soundtrack. And I honestly, ever since the anime, I've also now put this soundtrack onto another one is that would be the Shinsengumi Death Game, which I believe like episode 49 if I'm mistaken. But the Shinsengumi Death Game but as of late in the Pharaoh Shinsengumi arc, they used this soundtrack for the Day the Demon Cried in the anime for episode 308. So huge props to them for using this soundtrack, and also in the Mitsuba arc. It's one of the more iconic Gintama soundtracks. You can immediately pick it out, and it has such a nice tone, and you can immediately picture Mitsuba holding Sogo's face right there. He's trying to hold on, and God, it's such a beautiful soundtrack, man. Absolutely amazing. And every single time it comes on, I'm weeping, man. Like, God, they used it for the Day the Demon Cried, dude. I'm still stressing. 308, episode 308 is legendary. So coming in number 4, this one I couldn't believe it wasn't higher, but I had to rate it based on how I feel emotionally after listening to the soundtrack. And this one, though I may like it a lot, it doesn't hit as hard as the others do. And that is The Meeting with Shoyo Sensei, also known as the soundtrack that always plays whenever they start doing one of the Shoyo scenes, like in episode 180. Whenever Gin and Shoyo are out there, and it's always connected to Gintoki's flashback, and though it is one of my favorites, I can't say that it gets me like hard, like in the feels. It gives me goosebumps, honestly. It gets me excited. But by the gods, man, whenever they use this soundtrack in episode 304, one of the best sequences in the entire anime, whenever they start off with the legendary speech with Shoyo giving whenever he gives that legendary speech to Takatsugi, and then directly after that he comes right in and we get to see Gin and Sugi just go at it, and it goes to the past, they go at it, goes to the past, goes at it, goes to the past. It's flipping beautiful, man. I love the way episode 304 used this soundtrack, and it's such an awesome dun 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 dun. And whenever I did my Gintoki versus Utsuro video, I had to put that soundtrack in there because this is Shoyo's soundtrack. This is Shoyo's theme. And like I said before, the only reason why it's not higher is because it truly gives me chills. It gives me goosebumps. It gets me in that aspect emotionally. But it doesn't make me as sad, I guess you could say. It just gets me like really emotionally like destroyed is the best way to put it. So that's why that's at number 4. Now coming in number 3, this one, the reason why it's higher than the other 2 is because it's used quite a bit in the series, so it has like that connection with Gintama. I associate this with Gintama. This is a Gintama soundtrack, and that is Take Care Buddy. Every single time I hear the soundtrack, I immediately can just point out that's Gintama. That's Gintama, and there's so many. This is probably the one that I can say that there's just so many soundtrack. There's so many scenes that use this soundtrack that it's really hard to just pinpoint one. But I just every single time it comes on, I'm like, okay, it's gonna get real now. It's about to get real. When Take Care Buddy plays, the scene is gonna get real, and it's such an awesome soundtrack, such a beautiful soundtrack. And whenever it's used in anything, in the comedy arcs and the serious arcs, it does, like I said before, it's about to go down when Take Care Buddy plays. And that's why it's in number 3. It has that emotional connection to Gintama as a whole that I think the other two don't, because the other two only get played during specific scenes for specific characters, whereas Take Care Buddy is more of like a whole thing. It plays all the time. So that's why that's at number 3. Now coming at number 2 and number 1. This one right here, number 2, man. This is on here. It's on here for flipping, for overall as a soundtrack. It always gets me, but honestly, it's on there for episode 305, and that is: the more precious the burden, the heavier and more difficult it is to shoulder. As much as I love it in episode 180, and as much as I've always loved this soundtrack, the one thing that I've always said from the moment the Shogun Assassination arc was announced to be animated, and even whenever I read the manga, I said that soundtrack has to play whenever Gin is giving his entire speech to Sugi, because it just fits. And when the anime did it, it surpassed my expectations of what I initially thought I was going to do. And to this very day, I still think of that entire speech. I am the disciple of Yoshida Shiryo Sakata Gintokida. And he tells that, and then Takatsugi says, "I haven't been expelled, have I?" And then finding out what Takatsugi, what was the last thing he saw with his eye, and from then on, and then you see them both on the floor. Why the hell did you choose us, Gintoki? I immediately relate to that scene, and that makes me just want to tear up. I'm like, God. So that's why that's number 2. It's associated with my favorite chapter in all of literature, for God's sakes. I mean, what more reason do I need, man? It's such a beautiful soundtrack. The more precious the burden, the heavier and more difficult it is to shoulder. I mean, just the name is insane. So if all of those have been pointed out, then what's the only one left? What's the only one left, man? Number 1, it's got to be: this soundtrack is Gintama to me. It is Gintama. It is Koko wa Samurai no Kunida. This soundtrack, every time that I listen to it, I always remember the funny times. I always like to call it the comedic times in Gintama, but pre-Shogun Assassination arc, where then everything even though it is it's still funny, it definitely took a shift in its storytelling. It's no longer that episodic. It's more of long story arcs ever since then. So like in those times of Gintama, this was the soundtrack, and especially in early Gintama, there's such a nostalgic feel to it. The dun 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 dun, and I can attach this to so many different one-shots, so many different episodes. But honestly, the one that sticks out to me, and I don't know if this was on purpose by Bandai Namco Pictures or Sunrise or whatnot, but my favorite placement for the soundtrack, because it fits so well, was the final soundtrack before Shogun Assassination arc. The final thing that we saw, that we heard, was this soundtrack, signifying that this was the end of the Gintama we once knew. And what a way to then let's do with that soundtrack. That's the way that all the comedy episodes ended. So all the one shots episode ended. That's the way all the episodes ended, was with the soundtrack playing. And when the 299 ended, when Oil Rain, one of my favorite chapters in Gintama, ended with this soundtrack, right before we got into Shogun Assassination, it was just such a perfect end to everything that we had known Gintama to be. And I feel like they could not have used a better soundtrack for that scene, and that's why I always attach it to that scene now. It's raining oil, and that's the final scene of old Gintama, or pre-Shogun Assassination arc Gintama, before it changed, and started going to like the longer arcs of storytelling. But it was such a beautiful way for it to go out. And God, every single time I think of this, it's just so many Gintama scenes I can point out with this freaking soundtrack, man. Everything 111 starts hitting me. It is Gintama. The soundtrack is Gintama, and when I think of Gintama ending, this is the soundtrack I play, and I tear up. So that's why it's number 1 and most emotional Gintama soundtrack, because it is Gintama. And whenever Gintama ends, I'm gonna be listening to this, and I'm gonna be dead. I'm gonna be dead on the inside. Ah man, but please let me know what your top 5 most emotional Gintama soundtracks are down below. These are my top 5. Please go, like, just go on a session one day and just listen to all these and just think of all the amazing moments, man. And just let me know. Just let me know what your top 5 most emotional Gintama soundtracks are, and whether you agree with this list or whether you disagree with this list. I would just love to know what your top 5s are. So thank you very much for watching. Have an awesome day. And man, dude, Gintama's coming to an end soon, man. But it left us with so many amazing soundtracks. I'm looking forward to hearing what kind of new soundtracks hopefully we'll be hearing here in the Rakuyo arc. It's gonna be sick, especially, God, man, when we get later on in the arc, there's gonna be a lot of sad soundtracks being used. So that's gonna hurt. That's gonna hurt. But you guys have an awesome day, man. It's Goatama awesome sauce.